The New York Times called George M. Johnson's memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, an exuberant, unapologetic memoir infused with a deep but clear-eyed love for its subjects. Johnson lays bare the darkest moments of his life with wit and unflinching vulnerability. Despite the praise, it is also a book that has been banned in 8 states and 29 school districts for being what its vocal critics call sexually explicit, pornographic, and inappropriate for kids. It is a shocking story in many ways. George details being molested by a family member at 12 years old and how that act colored their views of trust and intimacy throughout their life. He goes into what it was like to have their first consensual sexual encounters without the knowledge or preparation for what that would mean physically and emotionally for them. The book is uncomfortable and unexpected for the reader at times. Does it cross over into pornography and inappropriateness? You have to make that decision for yourself. But in the book and in our conversation, George paints different, nuanced possibilities for Black boys, pulling us from the obscurity of self-erasure into a declarative existence. What does it look like if you get to define for yourself who you are? What if you find love and brotherhood and companionship with other Black men, as opposed to just fearing and fighting one another? What if you get to paint with all the colors of the rainbow, not just blue? Hello and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with George M. Johnson. George M. Johnson is an award-winning Black, non-binary writer, author, and executive producer located in the Los Angeles area. They are the author of the New York Times best-selling young adult memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, discussing their adolescence growing up as a young Black queer boy in New Jersey through a series of powerful essays. The book was optioned for television by Gabrielle Union. As a former journalist, George has written for major outlets, including Teen Vogue, Entertainment Tonight, NBC, and BuzzFeed. In 2029, George was awarded the Salute to Excellence Award by the National Association of Black Journalists for their article, When Racism Anchors Your Health, in Vice magazine. George was listed on the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans in 2020, the Out's 100 Most Influential LGBTQ People in 2021, and in 2022 was honored as one of the Time 100's next most influential people in the world. Their second memoir, We Are Not Broken, was released in September of 2021. It received the Carter G. Woodson Award, which recognizes books that accurately and sensitively depict the experience of one or more historically marginalized racial ethnic groups in the United States. The book also received the Nonfiction Honor Book in the Young Adult category from the International Literacy Association. In 2021, they wrote and executive produced the dramatic reading of All Boys Aren't Blue, starring Jennifer Lewis and Dylan Burnside, which received a 2022 Special Recognition Award from GLAAD. George is also a proud HBCU alum twice over and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. George, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you for having me today.
It's a real honor to sit down and speak with you in person. I had the true privilege of reading your memoir. You've written two memoirs. So your first memoir, All Boys Aren't Blues. We're going to talk about that and much more today. So thank you for making time today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was reading the book and you wrote this quote. Then when I read it, it almost took my breath away. And what you wrote was this: when you are a child that is different, there always seems to be a something. You can't switch. You can't say that. You can't act this way. There's always a something that must be erased. And with it, a piece of you. The fear of being vulnerable again outweighs that happiness that comes with being who you are. And so you agreed to erase that something. I realized the only place that was truly safe for me would be in my imagination. And that statement struck me because when you're a child growing up, that's deemed not normal. You talk about learning to erase a part of yourself. And it's something that I personally experienced growing up. And I never had a person articulate that sense of just taking away pieces of yourself in order to feel like you can fit in. How how did you realize that, and how did you find the language to express that? Because I feel like that's the core of what you talk about, is that being able to bring yourself fully into your life.
Yeah, I think for me, finding the full language to express it was like processing what I was erasing in my adulthood, I guess, in many
Mm,
ways. And so, as an adult, there were still certain things that I was blocking myself from doing. There were
mm,
certain things, certain ways that I wanted to dress that I would second guess myself, or certain mannerisms that I would catch myself if I was in this room, I would try and downplay. And I was seeing it play well into my adulthood. And so for me, it was about challenging, like, why do I stop myself from fully being myself? And I think I was able to pinpoint certain parts of my past, certain parts of my childhood when, I was told to not do this thing, or I was ostracized by other students and other kids for being effeminate, or for walking a certain way or talking a certain way. And so you just start to begin to erase like these little things about yourself until you become an adult that's realistically like a shell version of yourself, where you're pretending to be this person as you're trying to like assimilate in many ways into pockets of communities. And so part of writing the book, part of everything I do was about like unlearning all of those things that told me I couldn't fully be who I was as I was innately. And so that was really what it was about when I had to find that language. It really was me being an adult that was realizing that I was still erasing pieces of myself. And like the moment I stopped doing that and started to do that unlearning healing work, I was able to write from the perspective of the kid who had to do those same things to just survive for
mm.
safety reasons, to just fit in, to again not be ostracized. And once I became an adult and realized like I don't want to continue that path or that pattern, I was able to kind of write from the voice of the kid who had to do that as a means of living.
How did you reach that point where you decided, okay, the erasing has to stop? Like, what brought you to that point?
Yeah, I think what brought me to that point was the fact that I was doing all of this erasing, and one, it wasn't creating like a dynamic shift in my happiness. And two, you kind of get to a place where it's like, if I'm going to change all of these pieces of me and change all these parts of me, and these people still have issues, then I might as well just be myself. And you just kind of come to that realization, like, I'm doing all of this work, quote unquote, to be this thing that you have all dictated that I have to be, that I have to act like, that I have to dress like. And I'm still running into the same issues as people who I know who are just being themselves. So it's like, I might as well just fully be myself and really not put a lot of weight on what people think about me, how people feel about me. Yeah, and navigate the world however I choose to navigate the world.
Right. This idea of self-erasure, or taking yourself out of being visible, actually, is what happens, I think, to young people particularly, and older people who are not sort of within sort of heteronormative context that we're told that we're all supposed to be a part of. It's really dangerous. And I think it really speaks to this time that we're in when the very lives of queer people, trans people, those who love and exist without the sort of context that we're supposed to be in, that framework. I mean, we're literally in jeopardy. I mean, laws are being passed that have banned healthcare for transgender kids. Your book has been banned in 8 states. It's almost like the very representation of who we are is being stripped out of culture, of existence. And I wonder, from your perspective, why do you think a Black, queer, non-binary, transgender boy or girl, why is that so threatening to people?
Yeah, honestly, it's like I don't know if it's as much as the person is threatening to people as much as the ideology of the binary is threatening to people. Because I really don't think most people even know what a non-binary person looks like or is able to even understand what a trans person is. So I think like it's like ideas have been put into people's minds that they are supposed to fear this particular type of person. But we have seen countless times like a regular citizen in the South who is for trans legislation doesn't know the difference between a drag queen, a cross-dresser, and a trans person. Like they have no actual compass of what they're actually trying to stop or who they're actually trying to stop. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that some don't, because I do believe some don't, but I think ignorance is very, very bliss when it comes to this particular topic. I think that so many people have been ingrained with the fact that you only have man, woman, or you only have male, female, despite centuries of history that have talked about third gender, two-spirit, all of these other identities that have existed well before everybody had to be civilized by, Western civilization's belief system. And so, yeah, it's like I often struggle with that because it's like, even when people are trying to ban my book, right? It's like, but they haven't read the book. So it's like you're actually banning a text you never really read. Yeah. And so it's almost like the whole judging of the book by its cover. And so a lot of what I feel has been happening, especially legislation wise, is like, oh yeah, I don't want these LGBT people to have any rights. And then you talk to them or you actually talk to a person and you're like, well, I'm actually LGBT. And they're like, oh, you are? Well, I didn't want to take your rights away. I was talking about the pedophile, right? Because like that's literally like, and I mean, like I've had these conversations and they have literally linked queerness to pedophilia. And so that's in their mind, it's just like, I think about like when they were, because a couple of years ago, it was that Mexicans were raping everyone, right? That was the narrative. And then you had all those people in that one city vote, to get quote unquote illegal immigrants out. And then the man who owned the corner store gets arrested by ICE, and every single person is like, oh, we didn't mean Joey, we meant the rapist ones. And everybody's like, how would anybody know who the rapist Mexican is? Like, how could a person ever walk up? And no, I feel now it's just switched to us, but it's like, oh, we didn't mean George, or we didn't mean that one. We meant the pedophile ones. And it's like, well, how would anybody just walk up to a queer person and be like, oh, that's a pedophile one, that's a not pedophile one, right? The bathroom conversation, right? Like, who's in the stalls? Who's in the stall? Like, what are y'all talking about? And so I really feel like it is like that, the red herring case in many ways, because most of these people probably don't even know what LGBTQ stands for.
Yeah. But I think you hit something really interesting on the head, is that these concepts that we're trying to have people understand and embrace, they're not flesh and bone for people.
Right.
They are ideologies that exist in a political discourse or exist in a person's fears and imaginations about what things are. But when they're in real time with a living, breathing person who is one of these things, it's like, oh, not you. And it also speaks to the separations that we live with in our societies, where we don't interact knowingly with people who are different from us. We've become so separated, and we live within these sort of silos that we don't even have an understanding of who's next door to us if they don't subscribe to our particular church, political party, cable news show, et cetera. So I think what's interesting about the book is that you're actually bringing into three dimensions a person's story, a narrative story, you know?
Yeah.
There's a moment in the book that I wanted to talk about because I felt like when I'm reading the book, and I think everyone should read this book, it's a book of really beautifully written essays, and these essays sort of chronicle your journey through your understanding of who you are as a young child through your college years. And what I thought was really brilliant about the book, George, was that you're able to use these stories to really embody, hopefully for the reader, what it means to be Black, queer, and before you took on the pronouns they and them, a young boy growing up in these. And your story is unusual because you have a very supportive environment that you're growing up in, which we can talk about. But many people don't. Many people don't have that. But what your story is able to do is able to drop in and give people a sense of this idea of empathy for your experience. And I think part of it is the honesty that you use to write and tell the story. But there's a moment in the book, I think you were in middle school. I want to say you were in junior high school, and you were double dutching. You had gone to jump roping, and you really got involved in loving the jump roping. And one of your friends came to you and was like, listen, they're calling you a faggot, basically. And we're about to play football. Why don't you come play football with us to sort of put that to bed? And you go to play football, and you've been playing football with your family. You just weren't doing it at school. So they go and they throw you the pass. And you talk about you had three tacklers, three defenders on you that you're literally dragging on your back into the end zone. And I thought it was really an accurate and beautiful illustration of what being Black and queer is like. Because you're carrying the weight of the world and fighting against the world on your shoulder just to stand up and make it into the end zone. That literally made me laugh a little bit and made me cry at the same time because I was like, that's what the existence feels like. Can you talk about that moment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of those moments that has always stuck out in my mind, primarily because it was like that realistic first moment of choosing safety over happiness. Like my happy place was jump roping and double dutching with the girls. I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it to this day. Anytime I'm with a group of friends, I still double dutch with them because it's something I enjoy. I've always enjoyed it. But that moment though was like the reality of like, we were in fifth grade when that happened. And so the reality though that sunk in was, like I always say, at 5, I knew I was different. By 10, they knew I was different. So that was like that first moment of like, oh, like the collision happening where it's like, oh, they also recognize that I'm not like them. And because they recognize I'm not like them, they either want to disrespect me, ostracize me. They don't want to be around me because they don't want anybody to correlate how I am and how I act to who they are. And these are like things that like are hard to process as a 10-year-old. So you don't have all the knowledge, you don't have all the tools. And so you're literally trying to process with a child's mind these very adult things, these very adult subjects around gender and sexuality and mannerisms and being effeminate. And you really don't know what that all means. But what you know is when I act this certain way, these kids act that certain way. So it wasn't a hard decision for me to be like, all right, I'll play football because I know what that word means at 10 and I don't want to be called that word. So I need to at least try to prove that I can also do these type of sports and I can also be this type of person too. Playing football, for them, they thought it was something that was new to me when I had been playing football with my cousins for years. And my cousins were rough. I grew up with rough cousins, like really, really rough cousins. Like it just is what it is, right? Like we used to fight, they used to, toughen me up, all of those things. So it's like I didn't grow up not knowing how to do all of those things, play baseball, how to run track, how to do all of those things because I grew up with cousins who I was with all the time. And that's what we used to do. So I think it is, part of the story is like symbolism in a way of, the fact that like I am always carrying multiple defenders on my back and always having to almost prove myself time and time and time again. Because I think part of that moment was like the young kid trying to prove themselves to this group of people that I never sought to want to fit in with. And I think that's the other thing too, right? Like that's society in a nutshell, right? It's like I'm being forced to fit into this group of people that I didn't seek out. I think everybody thinks when it comes to LGBTQ people that we're looking for like acceptance or acknowledge. Sometimes it's like, no, I did not seek them out. You all sought me out and targeted me. And I did this as a means of protection and survival. And I think that's really the story of LGBTQ people. A lot of times we don't seek this out. We don't seek other communities out. We don't want to be in some of y'all spaces. Like we don't care. Y'all target us though, and it forces us to have to do these things, to have to carry the defenders on our back, to have to carry the weight of the world on our back as a means of survival. And so I think that's really what that story ends up becoming. It was just a story of survival, the survival of a 10-year-old. And it wasn't the survival of a 10-year-old against these kids. It was the survival of a 10-year-old against their parents' ideology. Because they didn't just come up with that. Someone told them you can't be like that. Someone told them to, or they heard people clown people who were like me, or joke people who were like me, or treat people bad who were like me. So I'm not just fighting these kids. I am fighting an adult world too, who also is judging me and judging my mom for allowing me to be me. So it's much heavier than just the decision of double dutching versus football.
I think what you're saying brings back to me the sort of first question we talked about, which is, why do you care if someone's doing drag? Don't go to the drag show.
Right.
I'm not coming to your house, knocking on your door, making you sit in your living room and watch someone do drag.
No, not at all.
And to me, that's the fundamental question. Why do you care what someone is doing within the confines of their life? I mean, I know our people care, but I mean, why do you care enough to try to stop it if it doesn't impact you?
Right.
And I think to me, that's the danger, is that people have assumed what's right or wrong for another person versus understanding that within this world, there are all the colors, all the flavors.
Yeah.
If there's a flavor you don't like, don't
eat it.
Don't eat it. I think for me, I remember, and I've written about this before, like the first time, like you had to carry 3 defenders across the goal line. And I was really picked on growing up. Once I started going through puberty and started understanding, oh, maybe I am different from people. And the counselor was like, you got to fight back. And I was like, I can't fight back. I'm a good Christian boy, turn the other cheek. And for me, that moment of you running down the field was me punching these 2 guys out who were on the bus picking on me. And I just had enough. They called me a nigger, hit me in the face, and that was it. And from that moment, no one's ever hit me again.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a belief that if you are queer, not straight, whatever the term is you want to use, that you are soft.
Yeah.
And that you can be taken advantage of. And I think we all reach that moment when we have to punch somebody in the face, or carry 3 defenders across the goal line.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
More for ourselves than even for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even about them at that point. It's about your own self-preservation, Yeah, because you reach a breaking point at times with that. And again, it's like people judging you for simply just being you.
Mm-hmm. One thing that stands out to me in the book is the support of your family. And I think that is a part of your story, your narrative that is very different from many, particularly Black queer children. We know that 40% of Black gay youth will end up homeless because they're just thrown out of their homes.
Right.
To me, that was really, I kept waiting for the moment in the book where your mom was going to say, I don't agree with this, or your dad was going to be like, I can't do this with you. And you didn't say it was easy for them. You just said they were like, you're my child, and we're gonna roll with this. And there are other people in your family who had different identity expressions and sexual preferences and all of that. Can you talk about the role? Because I think you sort of debunked the myth of the ununderstanding Black family, because you had a lot of support and understanding, particularly from your grandmother, Nanny.
Yeah, I mean, my family is still supportive to this day. I think I always post pictures of them, and I'm with them all the time. And I'm with baby G, my nephew, and I'm with my brother and my mom, my dad. Like, I've never known a time not having family support. So, like I said, it was more interesting for me to become an adult and learn that so many people who were like me didn't have family support because they were gay. I was like, that's insane to me because like it just was something that my family never practiced. Like I never felt ostracized in that way. Like I couldn't be around family or be with family. Like all my aunts and uncles knew who I was before I knew who I was. And they didn't change the way that they thought about me or felt about me or their protection of me. And so, you know, growing up in that type of environment, it was very interesting to see how others who were like me were being treated by their families. And so I did want to make sure that like in writing this book that my family became like a possibility model. And I think, you know, it's very interesting when we see like Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union and how they're raising Zaya. And we're starting to see more public instances of parents, specifically Black parents of queer children, like even like Judge Mathis and Greg Mathis Jr., who's a friend of mine, right? Like we're starting to see more like public displays of that where, and I think Greg put it so eloquently, like where we internalized as the queer person, like we didn't want to embarrass them and we didn't want to be a thing to them. So we would try to shut pieces of ourselves down so that they didn't have to deal with it, so that they didn't have to talk about it. When in reality, my grandmother, nanny, and my family was ready for anybody who ever said anything about me, but fully wanted me to be who I was. And I think that's what is important, you know, as I write it in the book, is that like my family is that through line from the beginning to the very end. The support that I had at birth is the support that you still see at the very end of the book. And I thought it was important to see that because of the statistics and because I think so many people are just so indoctrinated with a hatred of something that they don't fully understand. And some people are indoctrinated with a hatred that is so twisted that they don't know why they hate it. Like they just hate it, but they have no idea like what started the hate of a queer person or started the hate of a femme person or started the hate of a trans person. They have no idea what even started it. And so I think that was like why it was important for me to write how my family always supported me and what the journey looks like for us, because it honestly has nothing to do with anybody else. And we're not worried about y'all. Like we are not worried about y'all. We are worried about our own safety and having our own family connections and dynamic. So yeah, I was fortunate to grow up in a family that's been extremely supportive of me. And I'm even more fortunate that the world gets to see that support, because I think it has helped other parents, specifically Black parents of queer children and Black parents of children who may be queer one day. Because I think that's the other thing, right? I think it has helped Black parents decontextualize like, whoa, I never thought that my 7-year-old who right now exhibits masculine, quote unquote, tendencies, that maybe at 14, that may not be the case. And, you know, I built in my mind, oh yeah, you're gonna go to prom and you're gonna have a girl and you're gonna do that. But I've written a narrative that I don't know may be true for my child. And then what ends up happening is you're not fighting your child, you're fighting the narrative you wrote in your head about your child.
You talk about that in your birth story. You say, we from the beginning try to like place people into these very sort of specific lanes based upon their sexual parts versus why don't we just have a model where we can sit back and see what that child becomes and then celebrate that.
Yeah, because again, and I mean, I've heard it. There was like a funny story. Like I remember when one of my friends came out to their mom saying that they were gay, and like her first response was like, "So I'm not going to have grandchildren." That's literally because you've built this whole narrative of what my life was supposed to be in your head. So you're not even fighting me anymore. You're just fighting the narrative that you have written in your head about me. And so I think that's the work that the book has done, like, is to kind of like help that unlearning process of people who are literally fighting narratives. And I would liken it to almost like when a person is dating almost and looking for someone to date, and then they may have had 3 or 4 good people that they should be dating, but they're fighting the image of what they create in their head that their ideal partner will be. And so it's like, you're actually not even fighting this person. You have built a man or a woman or whomever in your head, a trans person, non-binary person in your head that nobody can see, that doesn't exist. And so you're literally holding people to a standard of something you created in your head. That's the same way I feel when it comes to talking about like the raising of queer children. It's like you're fighting an ideology, you're fighting this thing that you created in your head about your child, that your child was going to go to college and go to prom and give you grandkids and all of these things, which they still can do.
all
It's
that.
just not going to be the way that you envisioned it. And so you're fighting what you have built in your head for me versus actually fighting me. And in doing that, like, you actually just harm your child more.
I think too, there's something about the idea of the parent's dream. And also, when I was growing up, it was just that's the one thing you don't want to be. You don't want to be queer. I mean, and when I was growing up, there was no such thing as non-binary in the public discourse. That was happening still, but there was no language for that in the public discourse. But that was the one thing you didn't want to be. You don't want to be queer. You don't want to be gay. So I think you're right. I think what your family is able to do, and it really starts with your grandmother, I think, because she brought in all of your family and created a space where all of your family could be. That's the victory of your story to me that underpins the story, is that you had the roots to let you grow, to let you spread your wings and become who you are.
Yeah, that's been like the most beautiful, I guess, part of the story was like a lot of it was me finding out who I was, but they always just gave me the space to do so. And I do talk about it in the book too. Like sometimes I wish that they did just ask or that they did have the language to do so, but they didn't have the language, right? So it's like I can't hold them accountable for something that for a tool they didn't have. And I think that's also something that we tend to do is we try to hold people accountable for skill sets and tools that they just aren't equipped with. And so they didn't know that to ask. They didn't know. They just kind of saw what was going on, but didn't really know what the question would be. And so they just kind of were like, well, we'll let you kind of walk into it on your own. Just know we always got are here to support you. And it all turned out, for the best, in my opinion. But now when we have queer people who are coming through the family, it's much easier for us to have those conversations with my cousins and the parents and even the kids, like to just be like, to sit down and talk through it and talk about it, how they're feeling and all of that, because I've went through it. And so I think it has like helped us, even as a family, move a generation forward to where we can have those conversations with the teens and the young adults who are in our family who may be questioning their identity or who may be exhibiting signs of things in their identity. It's much easier for us to have those conversations now.
And I love the moment that you write about when you're on the line. They don't say that anymore when you're online. There's like a more
I think they say like membership intake process now, but
yeah, you're online.
I was online. Yeah, I was.
You're on the line to become an alpha, and I love that you chose to do that. I love that you chose to like put yourself in that space for whatever your reasons were, but you put yourself in that space. But I love the moment when you're crossing over, you open your eyes, they take the hood off, however they do it in the book. I don't recall right now, but you see most of your family is there. That's when I really broke down and cried because I was like, again, that level of support. Yeah. It was unconditional. It is unconditional for you.
Yeah. I mean, my dad paid for me like to be online. Like when I told him, he was excited about it. Even though he didn't come to my probate, but that's another story for another day. He was very interested when it came to certain things. Like and again, like even now, he now starts to show up to like my book events and stuff. But for a while, it just wasn't in him. Like he would rather cheer me on from the bar. As I always say, like, that's his thing. Like he will talk about how the great things I'm doing up and down, but he never was like a person to just like be at events. But yeah, like my mom was there. I think Aunt Sarah was there. Aunt Munch was there. I think my little cousin Kennedy was there. Like my whole family was there. My friends were there. My Uncle Raw was there. It was just like one of those moments for my family. Like they were super excited about it. And it was a super exciting moment for me to, join the fraternity, especially with all that I had been through. And I think that's why it was like, it wasn't just like my moment. It was also like, I feel like a moment of relief for my mom to be like, okay, like I know my child's going to be okay. Because like my child was able to make it through this particular type of process that I know as a fraternity can be very masculine centered. And so it's like, if they call me Matt. So it's like, if Matt can go through these type of things and make it through these type of programs and these type of organizations, then I know that my child will be okay in this world. And, she also felt like I had an added support system now. Like, whereas because I'd never had like a whole lot of friends and friend group because of how I was, but she could then see like, okay, well, my son now has a line and line brothers and older brothers and a whole fraternity now backing them, And so I think it became like one of those moments that was, great for me because I had done something I had always wanted to do and proved myself to myself. But I also think it became like a moment of relief for my mom to know that I was going to be okay because I had this support of other people now. Almost like that handoff from like when you're going in from family to adulthood. It was like, well, you always had home support, but now I know you have society support. It don't always look the way we want it to look, but it was I have a form of society support when it comes to the fraternity. So yeah.
What is really powerful about the book, particularly reading it as a Black person, is that you show the wide range of what Black male love looks like and Black male relationship looks like. Because often we get very sort of Ike Turner views of what Black male love looks like, or we get some really sort of anesthetized, simpering type of Black male love. And I think you show the love of your father, the love of your brothers and your cousins, the love of the guys that you're online with. It's beautiful to see the complexity that we all know we have, that we all live with. But for a broader audience who potentially could have a very limited view of what Black male relationships look like. And I think that's one of the powerful undercurrents of the book.
That was also like intentional. I wanted to showcase that, like I said, I talk about my cousins all the time, but like there was no shaming of me, no demonizing of me. And this was from multiple various types of men in my life. Now, again, I had issues with certain students. I had issues with certain fraternity members, but I wanted to show duality. I think like we're not monolithic. And I think it can be very two-dimensional when we talk about Black men sometimes. And it's like, I wanted to showcase the nuance of Black men and how, me and my cousins, they still say it to this day. They're always like, they were like, we knew you were like different and effeminate, but they were like, we just saw you as mad. Like, it's like we saw Garrett as Garrett and we saw Raw as Raw, we saw Rasul as Rasul. Like, we just saw each other as who we were. So it just didn't ever register to us to hate on you because of who you were. Cause they were like, that's always like, since we first met you when you were 3 or 2, like you've always been that person. So it wasn't something that like we had to fix or restructure or change because you had always been this person. And then, it's when you go out into society that you start to meet people who have differing opinions and differing thoughts and ideologies around how people have to be and how people have to navigate. But I wanted to showcase that in my family, that was never the thing. The men in my family were very protective of me. They're still very protective of me. They just didn't operate from a perspective of like societal shaming and like demonizing and trying to change me. It was always about protecting me from people who were trying to change me. They wanted me to always be who I was. And I think that shows the nuance and the depth. But like I remember like when my dad went back to college, because my dad went back to college after we had both graduated, me and my younger brother, and he had to do a paper on gay marriage. And he called me and we discussed gay marriage and I told him my thoughts on it and explained all of those things. And it was like, I would have never thought that my dad would call me and be writing a term paper on gay marriage and like why like the right for it to stay and the need for it to stay and all of those things. And so, and he was in his 60s at the time. And so it just like really just kind of like showcased the nuances of Black men who actually give a damn about real community in real ways and supporting everyone and having that love for everybody, regardless of how we show up in the world.
You write about in the book a scene with your cousin who molests you essentially. And it's powerful what you write. And I wonder how that changed your view of who you were and how or if it changed your view of intimacy and how you had to recalibrate that for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I feel like that's why I waited so long before my first consensual sexual experience. I think I was still trying to figure out what that was, like why that happened, what actually happened. I think part of it also was the societal pressures to try to link my being queer to that incident. Because I think a lot of times, especially when you hear it still, right? Like, oh, something must have happened to you. for you to be this way. When realistically, it was no, certain people recognize that you already are that and then play upon it. So it's like, it's like that event happened, but it's like, it's not like that event happened and all of a sudden I became queer. Like, right. That's what part of the book's journey was. So to say at 5, I knew. I didn't have language though. So when this incident happens when I'm 12, that's not the incident that all of a sudden now I'm questioning myself and no. Like I had already been questioning myself since the time as early as 5, I can remember I was questioning myself. So I think that was, that was like why I wanted to write it in that way, to kind of showcase that. Because that is like the straw man argument that people have used historically to try and say that queer people are pedophiles and everything. And so I just wanted to kind of debunk the myth of that. I think when it came to my adulthood, well, it's interesting because I guess that event didn't necessarily, I don't think that event did, or that incident did as much to shape me as being denied the ability to date. And so it's very interesting when I try to like look at like the weight of like what created how I have navigated relationships and dating and how I've navigated intimacy, how I've navigated all those things. And I don't look at that incident as being more powerful in how I moved versus the denial of me being able to be integrated into society. And as I've written before, having to live a second adolescence well into my 30s because I had 10 years taken from me. I didn't start dating realistically until I was like 24, 25, because I had to become comfortable with even saying I was gay. So like I had already had a huge delay, so I think that there were some other things that have created my struggles at times with intimacy. I don't necessarily pinpoint it to that event, but I do think the incident gave me like a lot of perspective on who I am, who I was, my ability to talk about the cyclical violence of sexual abuse that tends to happen. And it also helped me like to learn, which I did put in the book, but it helped me to like learn about what was happening to him and like what was going on in his life too. And, so it became like, oh man, it became like a very interesting thing. I knew like, I guess the best way to say it is like, I was going to write it one way. And then once I did the familiar research and talked to uncles and stuff about it, it changed my whole perspective on the incident. The incident still wasn't right, but I was able to process it through a different lens, process it through the lens of him also being a young queer boy in the projects who probably never got to tell his story, right. Probably never tell what happened to him. And so I was able to just process it through a different lens. And now it did, like I said, I think it did play a role like in certain things and my comfortability and my trust of people, especially people who were older than me, who were trying to approach me. It was like, it was hard for me like to process that because I didn't want to be taken advantage of again. Right. And I didn't want to feel powerless again. And I didn't want to feel used again in that space. But I think it was like a culmination of so many things that were happening. So I don't think I don't think like my journey through intimacy and my journey through dating is just like tied to this one event. I think it was like the not being able to date, the not being able to say I was gay, the sexual abuse, the like it all rolled in together to create this thing.
Where does it leave you? All of that, where does it leave you today?
Yeah, a lot of it was the unlearning work. I think I'm in a much better place now. I'm a lot more confident in who I am, a lot more comfortable in who I am. I'm a lot more trusting when I'm dating, because I always was kind of like leery around it because of the various things that I had been through. But I have a much stronger capacity for it. I have a much stronger ability to love. I have a much better skill set at it because I think that's also it too. Like, I think we don't look at it. We kind of look at it as like a thing that just is like natural to everybody. And it's like, it's not like, because of our life circumstances, it doesn't make loving somebody else innately natural. Like my love that I have for my family is easy. My love to have for a person who I'm just meeting and I don't know, who I have to go through this whole process with, that's not easy, especially when you've been through what I've been through. Because if you've been violated by a person you love, then you know that you could be violated by a stranger. So, so it does play a little bit of a role there, right? But you have to work through it, and I think that's what this journey has been for me. It's been a journey, and it's been, a marathon, and not a sprint. And so I take my time with it. I take my time with myself. I try to process all of my thoughts and my feelings. Yeah, and I think today, it has left me with a much better perspective around who I am, how I want to date, the type of person who I want to be with. And I think I've been able to get out of the mold that I've created in my mind of who my potential partner is. And two, I've also learned to become okay if there is nobody. Yeah, there are times I'm I'm happily single, y'all. People try to be like, you sure? I'm like, I'm fine. I promise y'all, I am happily single. I see sometimes I see what y'all go through, and I be like, oh yeah, let me just stay on this side. Sometimes I want it. Sometimes I'm like, I'm okay. So I think that has also been part of that journey as well.
Why aren't all boys blue?
That's a good question. All boys aren't blue because we're not a monolith. The request for us to have to go down the same particular path, even though none of us have the same spirit, none of us have the exact same upbringing, have the exact same experiences, but we're all expected to go down a particular path of, well, what sport is it? Is it baseball? Is it football? Or is it track? Or, or is it basketball, right? Well, what career is it? Is it this or this or this or that? I don't want you to be a school teacher. That's not, I don't want you to be a social worker. You need to be a banker or an accountant, right? It's the societal structures that have forced us into the boxes of what a man should be and what a boy should be. And I had to make the declaration that all of us are not blue. We are all not, that when that blue smoke comes out at the gender reveal, that doesn't then automatically mean that I'm going to want to play football and play in the mud and race trucks and do all of these things that y'all have deemed as masculine. We are all not the same. And I think people are starting to understand that finally, we're all not the same. We all have different walks of life, different struggles we will go through, but we all have a different journey and we all have a different path. And trying to force us to all be the same, trying to force us to be blue impedes the path, and it impedes the purpose of a person. We all have our purpose-driven life. And when you put up the roadblock of you need to be this way, you are just impeding the purpose of a person's life. And so I think that's realistically why all boys aren't blue.
I have one last question for you. In this season of the show, we're talking to people, exploring this concept of people who have found their voice and how they're using their voice to amplify what's important to them, what the world needs to hear, potentially. And I wonder, have you found your voice? And if you have, what do you want to say with it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody would say I found my voice. Yeah, I found my voice. What do I want to say with it? I don't know. I guess two things. I'm an author. Books are windows, and they're windows and mirrors. Books help people reflect who they are, so they see a reflection of themselves, but they're also windows because people from the outside get to see what the world is of somebody else's house, and the world is in the existence of somebody else. And so I always think that that's an important thing to remind people that books are not necessarily about the indoctrination as much as they are about the teaching a person of an experience while also allowing a person to see themselves, to know that they exist in the world. And I guess the other thing I would say is I'm unapologetically queer. I'm unapologetically Black. And when I raise my voice and when I use my voice, it is to remind people that I do not walk in a room as one or the other. I walk in the room as both of those things at the same time, simultaneously at all times. And I think that's been the hardest thing for people to understand. You got to be Black first. You got to be, I am who I am. Some days Black is before queer. Some days queer is before Black. But guess what? They're always going to be together when I walk in every room.
George, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for the book and the story and the permission for the world not to see all boys as blue, but to see the whole rainbow of colors that people are. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. Thank you, George.
Thank you.